So our last presentation is on the the 800-pound gorilla in the room, transportation. Dan Bishop, Bryan Hill.
Hello, I'm Daniel Bishop. I, along with Bryan and Ben Godsu, worked on the transportation and energy project. The purpose for this project was to discover opportunities for reducing energy using transportation policy and, more importantly, behavioral change. To that end, we looked at the objectives that many have put forward, such as reducing single occupancy vehicles, increasing bike ped, as well as having a more inclusive and extensive public transit system. After doing a lot of in-depth research and doing some crucial interviews, we kind of discovered that although those are great objectives, that's not an area that we need to be discussing right now. What we need to do is focus more on these three areas, which are potential concerns that will present themselves. The first being peak car and how that will transform our transportation system. The new CAFE standards that will be taking place over the next 15 years. And then the last one is the idea of reinventing the automobile and the whole transportation system itself. Maine, as we all know and has been showed, is highly dependent on the individual automobile. However, there's been an interesting study that's come forth on the idea of peak car. And in this graph, you can see the lighter bar is 1983 levels as a percentage of people who are getting a license, and then the darker bar shows the 2010 levels. And what you can see is basically that, especially in those under 40, that number has decreased, and most notably under 20, it's decreased dramatically. And if this trend continues, this is kind of the poignant idea of peak car, that we're at the stage where we have the peak amount of automobiles on the road. This into consideration, how will the CAFE standards affect Maine? This is a graph that Charlie helped to generate, and it shows basically the CAFE standards with the different implications based on 2035 numbers. So basically, at current standards, at about 27 miles per gallon, you can see that the amount of CO2 emissions that will be emitted, and so on it goes to if we implement the 2016 standards of 34 miles per gallon, approximately, and then of course the 2025 standards of 54 miles per gallon. But most notably, you'll see is with no implications, the walk bike will double if we don't change the standard, but you'll see that there isn't really a dramatic decrease in the amount of CO2 that's actually emitted. Now let's take a few look at some obstacles. This is perhaps the most poignant one, is that in Southern Maine and Maine specifically, we've seen since 1960 the population has increased, but more so the vehicle miles traveled has increased, and has increased at a greater rate. And this, at the same time, metro rates ridership rates have decreased from a high in 1980 of 3.5 million to current rates of just under 1.5 million today. So what this kind of brings about is, as the CAFE standards are implemented, it will allow individuals to travel further and further from the metro areas to access jobs and other opportunities, and it'll be cheaper. The current patterns show possibly less vehicle use by the individuals. However, the demand for different technologies will increase. But current development in Maine, and more specifically, Southern Maine, doesn't allow for technology shifts for individuals. And the patterns of development that we've been developing on are continuing to prevent those opportunities. The last thing I'm going to talk about is basically that despite efforts, by many in this building, we have tons of information, but we still lack a lot of information on what the actual needs will be for transportation in the future. Bryan's actually going to speak to an organization who's actually been working on trying to discover those needs.
Okay. So I am Bryan. I'm gonna talk about the Regional Transportation Program and some of the efforts that they've had in extending transportation opportunities in the Southern Maine region, and the implications that those studies could have on how we invest or allocate our resources towards transportation alternatives and opportunities. The Regional Transportation Program provides paratransit services to the Southern Maine region. These services connect other transportation services such as Metro and the Casco Bay Ferry Line, as well as providing ADA services, American Disability Act services. As such, they're door to door rather than curb to curb. So providing some of these paratransit services can ultimately help us decrease our dependence on these personal automobiles, and that seem to be a really big part of our energy picture in Southern Maine. And particularly as we may be reaching peak hour, that could be very important. Some of the biggest challenges that RTP identified in sort of creating a system to meet those goals were the difficulty of developing support outside of the Portland proper, in terms of things like volunteer drivers for their services that allow them to extend their capabilities. Another one was the upfront cost of vehicles and ongoing costs of fuel, which can be extremely high for one of their vans or buses, as much as $300,000 a year. So that's significant, and both of these challenges underscore the need for developing local and regional buy-in through the planning process that Ben so succinctly pointed out at the beginning, in order to both support through volunteer work and through participation in the services on an ongoing basis. And I'll go into that a little further as I explain some of what they're doing. So in meeting these challenges, RTP has provided us with a few lessons that will I'll illustrate here and we'll wrap up with. So first, the RTP developed early, intensive, and ongoing networking with individuals in the community, with vendors, with business owners, and universities and colleges, in order to develop an idea of what those needs were, what the resources were, what kind of volunteer force they were going to get, what the ridership would be, and how they could continue it, rather than the build it and they will come mentality that's so often surrounds these kinds of developments. Next, they have done more and more to market themselves as a green service. We all want to be part of green services these days. One example is through some of their hybrid vehicles. But a more salient example, perhaps, that sort of ties to the networking example that I was speaking of is their extension into North Windham, which was a project that was started in a study 10 years ago, and failed at first because there wasn't enough direct communication with the communities to develop that network, but has succeeded more recently, and it's impressive and notable because it was started on the express goal of environmental quality and protection under the hubris of reducing carbon monoxide emissions within the transportation corridor. Finally, the third way that they have met these challenges is are meeting these challenges is in investing in intelligent transportation systems. Intelligent transportation systems are oftentimes computerized, but ways of delivering information to the bus drivers or to the van drivers, to the services about where people are that are wanting the service, where they're trying to go to, and what is the most efficient way to get there. It's an on-demand and ongoing delivery of information that it could be a really key, crucial component of providing a lot more efficiency and ridership in their service. And it has been identified by RTP as an important aspect. So these all provide us with some lessons learned for the transportation service. So, and I wanted to close this section by talking about some of the opportunities that relate to those three focus areas that Daniel pointed out to us in the Southern Maine region. First is electrification of the automotive industry, which is something that isn't a very large factor right now, but support, and we'll probably see that increasing over the coming years. Smart grids and renewable electricity supplies are a big component of that. The next one is ubiquitous networking and real-time control. Again, that refers to what RTP was speaking of with intelligent transportation systems for autos and public transit. I'm sorry, going back to the smart grids and renewable electricity supply, I also wanted to mention charging stations. That's something that we perhaps want to look into further investments in. Currently, the city of Boston has 50 recharging stations for electric vehicles. The state of Maine has 5. So that may be something we want to look into more. Last is the use of dynamic pricing. Dynamic pricing is a sort of a systematized way of incentivizing the smart energy choices at the consumer level. An example would be the rebate system, whereby inefficient technologies, inefficient uses of energy are given a fee, and that fee is then pulled together and used to fund rebates to those who are purchasing energy efficient technologies and systems. So that's about all we have for transportation, and I'm going to hand it back over to Charlie.
Thank you all for letting my students do their presentation. You may have noticed some of them were a little nervous. This is because Jack threatened to shoot them over 15 minutes. None of them did. And I have a little clock up here, so they're all sitting there watching the clock and wondering when Jack was going to pull out the gun. Obviously, there is a great deal more about all of these subjects that we could talk about. My students will be working on papers elaborating on all 4 of these sections, which will eventually be posted on the Sustain Southern Maine website, along with some tie-in material that I'll do, and with Ben's presentation. So there'll be we obviously had to hit the highlights in our relatively brief time here today. I want to leave just with a couple of thoughts about what we thought about as 3 challenges for Southern Maine coming out of our semester-long exploration of energy. The first is, what role will the region, whatever that is, play in the choices between megawatts and negawatts, between energy efficiency and more production of energy? Who will say what, and who will play what role at the state and federal level? What will local governments do in choosing between being energy producers and energy savers? What role will the region play in choosing between our fossil fuel and renewable energy futures? It's almost certain that fossil fuels will remain a key part of our energy picture. Natural gas is poised to be an even larger picture, perhaps, if we get the transmission capabilities in here. And if you look at the Southern Maine region, it's really in kind of a unique position. On the one hand, it has a lot of opportunities for local renewables. On the other hand, it's also the meeting place where natural gas from Nova Scotia, from Alberta, electricity from Newfoundland, or from Quebec may all come down through that energy corridor into southern New England, which is the real target for that those energy supplies. It's all going to come through southern Maine. So we are in a position, and natural gas may continue to come up through Maine into even eastern Canada, as from the middle Atlantic states. So southern Maine is in a kind of unique place in these energy corridors. What role will we choose as that unique location? And finally, critically, I think, will the region, i.e. local governments and others, use key tools like building codes and zoning to supplement existing programs and information and incentives to achieve a more energy efficient future? A number of the presentations here emphasize how the spatial arrangement of the transportation system and the building system are really important parts of the choices that we have about energy, and most of those kinds of decisions are either made primarily or heavily influenced by the region and local governments. So what role will the region choose in addressing those issues? Fortunately for my class, I have to say, our job was simply to raise these issues and not to answer them. And to that purpose, I now end and turn it over to Sustain Southern Maine and you all to come up with the answers.